Good evening, everybody. I am Stesha Brandon. I'm the Literature and Humanities Program Manager here at the Seattle Public Library. And as we start tonight, I just want to take a minute to acknowledge that we're on Indigenous land. Here in Seattle, these are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, and specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders, past, present, and future, and we thank them for their stewardship of the land. Welcome to tonight's program with Karen Russell and Rick Simonson, presented with our friends from Elliott Bay Book Company. I have just a couple quick announcements before we get started. First, I'd like to thank our series sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation and the Seattle Times, for their generous support of library programs. Thank you as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation. Private gifts from the foundation from thousands of donors help the library provide free programs and services that touch the lives of everyone in our community. I wanted to mention that we have assistive listening devices available if you find that you need that. They are on the table there with the blue tablecloth. If you find that you need one during the program, you can just give me a little wave and I can bring it to you, or you can pop down now if you think you might need it. And finally, you received a survey when you came in. Please feel free to fill that out at the end of the evening. And we are very grateful for any feedback that you provide. I do read every single survey, so I appreciate you doing that. Thank you in advance for that. Now I am delighted to introduce tonight's speakers. Karen Russell is the author of 6 books of fiction, including the New York Times bestsellers Swamplandia and Vampires in the Lemon Grove. She's a MacArthur Fellow, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and has received 2 National Magazine Awards for fiction, the Shirley Jackson Award, the 2023 Batari, I don't even know how to say this. It looks like lattes. Karen, how do you say this? Batari Latz Grinzane Prize. I don't know. I know, right? Okay, that one stumped me. And the 2024 Mary McCarthy Award. And Karen was also selected for the National Book Foundation's 5 Under 35 Prize and the New Yorker's 20 Under 40 list. And well, she says here in her bio that she's now decisively over 40. So I like that. Karen has taught literature and creative writing at the Iowa Writers Workshop, the University of California, Irvine, Williams College, Columbia University, and Bryn Mawr College, and was the endowed chair of Texas State's MFA program. And she serves on the board of Street Books, a mobile library for people living outdoors. Karen is going to talk tonight with Elliott Bay Book Company's Rick Simonson. Rick Simonson is a senior buyer at Elliott Bay Book Company, where he has worked since 1976. Just let that sink in for a minute. Let's give them both a welcome round of applause.
Hi, thank you all for coming. Oh, is that deafeningly loud? I think the door that slowly closed, which felt ominous and amazing, has made this introvert anxious. So I'm glad now I'm just going to practice phonics for you all. But I really wanted to thank Elliott Bay. I wanted to thank my dear friend Rick for being in conversation with me. Stesha, thank you for hosting. Eric, thank you for writing this up. And it means a lot to be in dimensional space with you. I was here pregnant with my daughter for Orange World, and you can see how long it's been. When my first book came out, I mean, really, yeah, well over 20 years ago, I got to come to Elliott Bay, and to Seattle. I'd never been, and it just felt like something out of a David Mitchell novel. It was so beautiful to be in the store, and such a dream come true. And Rick does this for all of us. I talked to Kaveh Akbar, who's on book tour also. He said, to every author who I've talked to, I think feels like they're like the most special author at Elliott Bay, which is a real feat, to make us all feel seen and known and regarded. And all right, I'm just going to read a little bit from the opening of this book. It's called The Antidote. And it's about a woman whose job is receiving memories from people and storing them. So she banks things that people can't stand to know or bear to forget. But I remember you before you became a story. Sometimes I feel a thorn in my foot where there is no thorn. They tell me, not unkindly, that I should imagine nothing here. But I believe you are still alive. That's Marie Howe, Gretel from A Sudden Clearing. The Prairie Witch. A person can lose everything in an instant. A fortune, a family, the sun. I've had to learn this lesson twice in my life. The first time it happened, I was a 15-year-old fugitive from a home for unwed mothers. The second time, I was a prairie witch, chained to my cot in a cinder block jailhouse. Your second home, the sheriff liked to say. Officially, I do not exist in his West. Nevertheless, it is a crime to pay me a visit. On Black Sunday, before anybody knew to call it Black Sunday, I woke up in the jailhouse to a sound like a freight train tunneling through me. An ear-splitting howl that seemed to shake the stone walls. My body trembled like a husk on the cot, my fingers clawed into the mattress. For those early moments in the dark, I was nothing but the fear of floating off. What had happened to me while I slept? It felt as if a knife had scraped the marrow from my bones. Something vital had liquefied and drained away, and in its place was the new weightlessness, lightness, and wrongness, a blanketing whiteness that ran up my spine and seeped out of my mouth. Bankrupt was the word that rose in my mind. At first, I did not recognize the voice crying out for help as my own. I clamped down on the sound, panicked. I could not afford to lose any more ballast. My numb limbs began to prickle with feeling, pins and needles stitching them back to my brain. It was not a happy reunion. 10 white toes sprouted like mushrooms on the edge of a filthy green blanket, waving to me from the outermost limit of what I could make out. A kerosene lantern in the hallway gave off a feeble emerald glow, beyond which the cell plunged into shadow. Not even the pain was mine. It came and went like the wind. It drilled through my skin and swallowed the world. Or perhaps the black blizzard was already well underway when I woke up. Choking heat filled the jailhouse, lashing tails of dust. It occurred to me that I might be buried here before I could recollect what I was. Minutes and hours lost all meaning. I balled up on the cot and prepared to be pulled apart. Light cut a pathway across the turbulent sky. I watched a pale line brightening and widening through the small cell window. A greenish disk hung above the cloud wall, and it took me ages to recognize the sun. It was not midnight after all, but well past noon. I began to remember more about the land beyond the cell, the edgeless prairie. The name of the town where I worked returned to me, Nebraska, southeast of the Sandhills and west of the Platte. We were 4 years into the worst drought that any newcomer to the plains had ever experienced. Other beings kept older diaries. Cord, cottonwood trees told a millennial story that no politician had cared to read. Congressmen train themselves to think in election cycles, not planetary ones. They see spiking market highs and lows and forget how to read in circles. Us had been having brownouts for months, plagues of jaws and mandibles. Grasshoppers rattled down on the tractor cabs from hissing clouds. Thousands of rabbits fanned over the plains, chewing through anything green. Winged indigo beetles blew in from God alone knew where, husks shaped like hourglasses that nobody on the plains had ever seen before 1931, red sand from Oklahoma, black dirt from Kansas, dove gray earth from the eastern plains of Colorado, formed a rolling ceiling of dust above us that flashed with heat lightning. The sheriff and his family lived in a 2-story brick frame house facing the jail, parts and blueprint purchased from the Sears Roebuck catalog. It sat on the free side of the property, 500 yards beyond the bars of my 2-by-foot window. As dust blew into the cell, outside things became less and less real. The sheriff's house slimmed to a charcoal sketch, erased, redrawn, and lost to sight. The sky was well and truly falling. Now I forced myself to scream for help. It felt terrifying to release so much breath at once. The lightness rushed into my head. No one responded. How long had I been trapped here? The cell was 7 feet by 8 feet and furnished with nothing but the cot and a tin bucket half filled with the previous inmate's piss, or my own perhaps. I was the only prisoner left inside the jailhouse. But I was wrong about that. Something pounced lightly onto my chest and launched up to the ledge of the cell window, a huge bristling cat whose carroty fur seemed absurdly bright. Her ears pitched forward, her claws tensing on the ledge, her golden eyes regarded me serenely. Nothing called to the animal that I could hear, but a moment later, The cat slipped through the bars and jumped nimbly into the whirlwind. Just as she leapt, I recognized her, the sheriff's cat, a flatulent tabby who often slept on my chest during my stays in the jailhouse. The sheriff, out of stupidity or laziness, calls her nothing at all, not even cat. A memory wailed awake inside me. The sheriff had once drowned a litter of her kittens in a wash basin within earshot of my cell. 5 infant voices flooded through me, clawing at the soft walls within the walls, and again I heard the splash as the bag went under. Displaced water came trickling down the hall, while their silence deepened to permanence. The sheriff had caged the mother cat in a nearby closet, locking us both into impotent witness. Her angry cries had blended with her children's dissolving ones, and the last voices in the world could not have sounded more forlorn. A stupid man can still be a savant at torture. The sheriff had squatted on his haunches in front of cell 8, grinning through the bars at me as he poured fresh milk into a bowl for the dead kitten's mother. What a racket. You'll forget that nasty business in a snap, a powerful witch like you. My job returned to me before my name did. Yes, I am the antidote. I learned and remembered. I am a prairie witch. A door swung open onto my life, and I could picture my rented room in the boarding house, my poster facing the street, hand lettered for me by the calligrapher in Kincaid gold, the antidote of us, now accepting deposits. I advertised my banking services as a panacea for every ailment, from heartburn to nightmares. Some of my customers, I recalled, had made up a little jingle. The antidote to lovesickness, the antidote to grief, the antidote to gas pains, the antidote to guilt, the antidote to sleepless nights, the antidote to all regrets, the antidote to daydreaming, the antidote to shame. Most everyone knew about us, even those who denied our existence. The vault, some called us the prairie witches, and I knew what I did to earn my bread, what I had been doing since I was a much younger woman, absorbing and storing my customers' memories, banking secrets for the townspeople of us, sins and crimes, first and last times. Dewdrop blue mornings and nights of unspeakable horror, or who knew what my customers had transferred from their bodies into mine. These were only my guesses. I disappeared into a spacious blankness during my transfers. A prairie witch's body is a room for rent, a vault to store the things people cannot stand to know or bear to forget. Half the town banked with me, and even those who denounced me as a fraud and a blackmailer knew that I was open for business in room 11. People came and paid me to store some portion of their lives, a memory that was too heavy to carry into the future, too precious for daily reminiscence. As they whispered their stories into my green air horn, memories lifted out of their bodies and into mine. It was a painless exchange. Nothing my customers told me had ever once disturbed me, because I was never awake to hear them. Cocooned in blue trance, I could dilate to absorb anything. I did not return to my waking mind until a transfer was completed. I know as little about what I contain, I reassured my customers, as a safety deposit box knows about its rocks, as a jar of pickling vinegar knows about its floating roots, as an attic knows about its ghosts. Their dead were alive inside me, patiently waiting to be recollected. The weight of these deposits refreighted me, and after a transfer, I often felt a heavy ache in my ribcage or my pelvis, sometimes a swimmy brightness like goldfish circling my chest. And in this way, I knew that our exchange had been a success, and my customers would smile sheepishly and say, "Oh, I wonder what I just told you, ma'am. It's gone clean out of my head." I understood why my body felt so frighteningly light, and the word bankruptcy kept running through my mind. Something had happened to me that I had not known to fear. As it turned out, I was not alone. Farmers all over the plains were losing their entire harvest at this very moment. Families hid in their cellars while the clouds grew fat with black earth. The sky was a growling belly. Uzians cut out in their fields when the darkness eclipsed the sun believed they had gone blind. And many of these same farmers and ranchers had also just lost huge tracts of the past, the days and the nights I held in reserve for them while they went about the business of living. My customers who had banked with me loyally since my arrival in Uz would learn about my crash, and how could I prevent it? They'd come to make their withdrawals, and I'd have nothing to return to them. I had retained only a palmful of facts about my solitary life. I have always kept scrupulous records. I could tell you who visited me on July 12th, 1927, and the duration of the visit. I could tell you to the penny how much money I made in Uz County between the years of 1920 and 1935. But what did it matter if I charged this client $2 and this one $200? None of the numbers I'd inked into my ledger had anything real to say about the vastness of what I'd lost, which was spasms in my belly and the clawing grief. Black Sunday, before the newspapermen named it and swept it into history, pulverized the region now known as the Great Dust Bowl. And like so many of my neighbors, I woke to ruin. In the center of that storm, I believed that the worst had happened. But I was wrong about that. The dust had another lesson to teach me. So long as you're still drawing breath, there's always more to lose. Home, home. I tugged at the word until a world rose up. Chained to the cot, dirt inflaming my nostrils, I smiled in the dark. I believed I'd lost everything, but I hadn't after all. I remember you. Hope grew inside me then, unstoppably, as you once grew. I pictured green leaves twining around my rib cage, tethering me to my memories of you, your slippery 7-pound body and your strong whale. Every kick and twist I rehearsed, even the ache of losing you I welcomed home. It was the weight I needed to sit up and plant my feet on the floor of the cell. As long as there's a chance of our reunion, son, I promise you that I will go on living. On the night that you were born, one of the nurses at the Milford home risked her job to let me hold you. Lie back, she said, and let your baby drink. He knows what to do, honey. See that? He was born for this. I had never met such a hungry creature, so eager to live. I hadn't guessed my body could meet another being's needs so completely. You cried out, and I realized with wonder that I was the one you were calling for, the answer to your question, the antidote to your distress, your fear, your ravening hunger, your life thirst. I stared into your fierce dark eyes born open, and we fluttered in and out of sleep together in a dream of milk and heat and love. Then came the block of hours which were stolen from me. I believe now that I was drugged. We are sorry, but you lost your baby, a new nurse told me when I awoke. The sensation of my milk lifting through my breast to flood your mouth was barely a memory when a doctor I had never seen before handed me your death certificate. Those monsters with their sad smiles lied to me. I knew you were alive. Are you still? Thank you. I'll stop there. It was funny to read that thing about keeping scrupulous records. That's how you know this is a fiction, something I made up. My best friend is here, and one of our earliest jobs was to take high school children abroad. And did we once forget to carry the one and mess up the accounting for the entire summer? Perhaps. So that's the joy. That's the beauty of being a novelist. You can imagine another way, totally different from your own. I also picture this witch as very tall.
The witch?
Yeah, in my mind, she's like just a tall, willowy person.
So it's interesting to hear that passage read from it, which begins this book. She is one of 4 primary narrators. There are others, and maybe you should describe the others because they all engage with each other, and there are other people as well in the story, and it's not just a human story. There's other elements and forces at work. We'll get to that, but maybe say a little about some of the others who are in the book, the characters.
Yeah, it is a real polyphony out there on the plains. And I was really excited to get to have this conversation with you because having grown up out there, I mean, this is truly just a fraction, in fact, of the many people on the plains. But in this town of Uz, there's a Polish wheat farmer on Black Sunday. Everyone's crops are destroyed, but for some reason his are standing, and his uncanny streak of luck continues. I sort of conceived of him almost like Job in reverse, where it feels like a frame has been placed around him. On Black Sunday also, in his field, a scarecrow, a spirit trapped inside a scarecrow kind of blinks awake. So I think that's a little, yeah, that's more of an eternal vantage on the situation out there. His niece is living with him. There have been a string of unsolved murders in this region. Her mother was murdered and she was sent to live with her bachelor uncle, who they're strangers to each other. I think he was hoping somebody would help him with the cooking and the cleaning, but she's just not interested in that at all. And she's furious, and basketball's all kind of what's keeping her tethered to the world. And there's Cleo Alfrey, who is a fictional photographer modeled on the real Farm Securities, originally the Resettlement Administration photographers. I know you guys know this already, but Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans, Gordon Parks, so many of the most famous American photographers work for a project that was unprecedented. It was the government-sponsored New Deal photographers.
And in the book, they all have voice. I mean, they have their own narrative, and reading it, they're different voices. Which there's some books you read, the writers can't change their voice, but you have given them different voices. You also, it's fiction, but there are some real events, including we're talking about Black Sunday, and without going into too much detail, the book is bookended by two true 1935 events that happened in that part of the world.
Yeah.
So when all this was coming into being for you as a story to work on, what parts of it were some of the real things, and what parts that were sense that these characters were somewhere in this somewhat desolate little town, knowing what the Dust Bowl was in the 1930s, and where the sense of peril people really were clueless about how they were going to survive it, and there was no safety nets really, or what was beginning to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were no, and it lasted so much longer than I think I really understood when I learned about this as a young person. I mean, this wasn't, the drought lasted for years, and people were genuinely starving. I mean, it was a kind of desperation that I had, and I think that, if you've read The Grapes of Wrath, which was like a kind of a foundational book for me as a kid, I think I grew up knowing a pretty regional and a very white version of this story. So I didn't know going into it. I mean, I had this idea right after writing a novel, Swamplandia, about these kind of women whose jobs would be almost like an insulation system, for places like this, or, they are the ones who quite literally absorb the uncanny remainder for some of the violence that's required, right, to settle the West. And also, the kinds of happiness that can destabilize a life, or, the whatever equilibrium exists inside a town like this one. So that felt sort of important to me too. I think I was curious about that. Like, what are the things that we exile from our waking consciousness to go on living as we do? But I didn't know, when I got the idea sort of where it would lead me. And this book came in, it was a genuine surprise to me, and it felt very collaborative. So there are a lot of characters and voices inside the book. Outside the book, I sort of hit this limit where I had done a lot of reading, and I felt like I really needed help. I felt pretty like I had, I felt limited in this, to my perspective. So I started having conversations with people. I talked to an agroecologist who has a farm in Salem, because even though I went to good schools, it turns out I knew very little about soil. And she said, which I loved, and I'll share it with this, because I really felt there was genuinely inspirational to talk to her, and it does feel like a dire time right now. She said, if people understood the biological sciences of what is possible if we apply ourselves in a direction that supports these cycles that give us everything, so much is possible. She said, we're limited by what we don't know, And she really was like, we can't innovate our way out of this. Soil is not an infinite, right? But it was good to go out there and actually see it like a test case that you could extrapolate from to a different kind of future. I talked to Pawnee historian James Ridingen. I had been reading his work about white settler aggression in the region. Uz is a fictional town, but it is in this part of what is now Nebraska, the Pawnee, resided in that kind of a vast territory there for millennia.
Mhm.
So, and that was a big help to me. So I think in a funny way, I mean, I really just found myself cold calling people who are now dear friends
Right.
outside of the book.
Because when you, I mean, the previous novel, Swamplandia, you were living in the Florida you were from.
Yes.
And that's also got a great, there's elemental and larger forces at work in that book.
Right, but
but-
that was the
but-
joke I've been making. I did my research by just being a child and an adolescent in
Yeah.
Florida, which was,
But Nebraska, that's not the
which,
case.
yeah,
You
I
live
did
in-
my residency
You live in
there.
Portland now, but Nebraska was not.
No, it really wasn't. I had written a story, I think when I was sort of trying to figure out, when the first try, I mean, the version of this book I began during the pandemic, kind of in the middle of the pandemic. But I got this idea, quite early, and I tried to write one version of it. And some of the stories in these story collections,
Mhm.
there's one about a man who raises like literal tornadoes in Gosper County.
Yep, that's
There's
right.
a horror story about the Homestead Act set near where I imagine us to be.
And you have, I mean, you set this tonight by reading the Prairie Witch's piece and what she did. You've used some of that a little bit before in a different way in the novella Sleep Donation, where there's a shortage of sleep. It's
Yeah.
chronic societal problems. And so they would find people who had excess sleep and
Yeah.
so sleep is being transferred around. Here it's a whole thing of memory and people's stories. And because in the book, the language people use talking that feels very, one reason Karen wanted me up here was because she, especially after I read it, I could vouch for the Nebraskaness of the way people talk, because that's where I'm from. Anyone else in here of or from Nebraska? Okay.
Oh, that's so
Well,
great.
Yeah, see, but there are a few of us here.
I was a little concerned. I will say, like, I've of the groups of people that I'm concerned about, the wheat farmers. I mean, I did notice in some draft I was describing the sky a whole lot. I think because.
But yeah, it's at the same time, I think you'll get a real response. I remember Tim Egan, who lives here, a journalist, and was still working as a journalist here, but he traveled back and forth to that part of the country to write the book that called The Worst Hard Time, which was oral
Incredible.
stories.
Yeah.
And these are people who probably never told these stories to anyone. And Tim would always come back and say, I've been talking to your people, like he's their grandson that they didn't have to come get those stories. So anyway,
But I love that, because I think that kind of reticence, we were talking about, the omissions in, I think, every family story, right? The things that don't get passed down. I can't imagine a person in this room that didn't, discover something shocking, later in life about their own origins or about their own like lineage. And I think that's kind of reticence, right? Where people really have secret cargo that is never disclosed, and it can feel so private, and it can be harms done or harms endured, right? But I think for me, there are things that I think fiction can do that other forms can't do. And one of them is tallying some of these losses that you can't really study statistically, right?
right.
Um,
So, I mean, of course, the people, in fact, the Oletskis, who are the farmer, she's mentioned, Harp, who's a dryland bachelor farmer. He's not always a bachelor in terms of all he does in there's a little romance in there along the way. But they're of a people themselves have lost their language. They've given up the language, their Polish language, to be there and learning to adapt. I mean, the book is about the layers has a lot about the layers of erasure and creation. I mean, you're creating a new language or learning a new language, but having to let go. And what gets let go of when you lose all that.
And and sort of, right, and not just the past, but the future, right? I mean, we were talking a little about the theft of real children, and how quick that process is. I think there's something analogous happening with the ecosystem, right? So there's this millennial prairie ecosystem, that has been, I think the way I grew up knowing this history, and that was something that I think, the book was exploring. You would think that settlement happened on the moon or something, right? It was an incredible feat if somebody survived a winter on the harsh prairie. And what's excluded from that version of the history is that people were there for 900 generations. living very successfully with this ecosystem. So James Writing, and who I mentioned, we spoke about this a bit, the sod house, which, I read Laura Ingalls Wilder. I loved those books as a kid, and I really thought of the sod house as, it is an incredible thing to see. But for me, it stood in as like a symbol of pioneer ingenuity, right? And sort of like, and it's not that it's not. It's not that it doesn't. It's an incredible thing to make a new life in a new country. But I in no way connected it to these earth and mud lodges that are an indigenous architecture that goes back millennia. I never made that connection. I never thought this is a settler adaptation of a much older architecture in which other families were living. And I think not everybody was wearing those blinders, obviously, like the gaps in my own memories are clearly, not, that's part of the tragedy of these histories that overlap. But so I think that, the process of assimilation that happened so rapidly here, like I was telling Rick, my grandma was Sicilian. I don't even have like a recipe. I'm a white lady named Karen, so it's like, I think, and it's interesting to think about how whiteness gets constructed on the plains. And also to think about how quickly, this grassland that has this exquisite, it took billions of years to evolve, and how quickly it's uprooted and the fertile soil is laid bare. And then when the drought comes, there's no anchoring roots.
Yeah.
So my friend was saying, what a great metaphor. And I was like, it's very literal too, though. There were no anchoring roots. But I think there is a really interesting, way to look at sort of the homogenization of the landscape and the people too.
This book is almost 400 pages, and it's
It reads like a breeze, you guys.
no, there is breeze in there. It's that prairie breeze. But what I was going to say is that again, I'm talking about voices, but it actually holds quiet. There's a part. It's a book you don't want to read in a hurry. You want to that if any of you, there's only a few here from Nebraska, but that prairie thing where you're out in all that vastness and you're not even sure what your place in it is because the sky is like this and the ground's down here and you're not, you can see, it feels like infinite distance, and the wind has a part of that. And how significant are you? You're not sure, you feel some of that minuteness, and which also makes you mute in a way too, because it's bigger than, there's something so much bigger than you are. And yet it is peopled by people. But there are other part of it. When I say 400 pages, one could talk for hours about this book and what all it does. And so we're kind of glossing over, just beginning to touch in the buried Pawnee history, because it comes out. This book actually is a novel, but at the end it has a lost land acknowledgement that James Writing, and this scholar she's citing, actually wrote it for the book, and he wrote it having read the novel. So there's acknowledgement of what Karen has done and the care and everything, respect that's in the book. Even then, Karen's still qualifying, like, I know I'm not really saying what I should say or could say, but she's doing what she can, that kind of, appropriate humility we all have who are of this time and age. But the book works on several levels like that, serious, but also there's also other things. You mentioned, you touched a little bit on Asphodel Dell, the 15-year-old, she is out that age,
Yeah,
right?
she is 15.
Which is also interesting, the age that the Prairie Witch was when she became a mother. But this is the girl who's living with her, who's orphaned, and who's living with her uncle, but is really running around. And so where the book doesn't have a lot of community in it, in the sense of these people in this town are sort of being kind of terrorized in a way, but you can look at what we're dealing with in our present day by a sheriff in the case of the town. And but there is a community made of a team of girls, high school girls, who are abandoned even by their high school coach, because all these people are leaving this town. They're, it's not going to work. So Dell takes on making this basketball team. But say a little about what, I've got my ideas, but you're here. Say what the girls and that team what part of the book are they, or what are they saying or doing?
I'm happy to talk about this part because, well, we were just saying beforehand, during this period, there was women's basketball, and it was not like a high velocity game. They really were concerned about like girls overexerting themselves. So really liked the idea, and I think maybe I felt this way as an adolescent too, of just like a feral pack of like really angry young women that are like really determined to play this game. And the people who can still play it, either there's like a pocket of true neglect in their home, like, or they're not, or they're escaping something, or they're right. Everybody else is really needed in this all hands on deck situation. But school is suspended, and their season is suspended. One of the things that moved me about Timothy Egan's book were people's commitment to their daily rhythms, even when there were like howling clouds of dust, like eclipsing them, And that felt very resonant with today. Like there's something heroic, right? I remember reading people setting out like the dining lace, right?
Yeah.
In the face of this dust. And so that life wish seems commendable to me and incredible. And then I think in that story, in all of these stories in different ways, I think I was thinking about the context where something that is like can be genuinely virtuous and praiseworthy can tilt into, like American optimism. When does it become true delusion? And so this is a girls' basketball team, but Dell, I will say, becomes kind of Ahab-like. I mean, she really is so determined to win. And I mean, that quality recurs sort of in other characters' storylines too. People who are that single-minded obsession really reduces their ability to see what the costs are to other people. And that certainly can happen to me. I mean, I think that's a real human predicament, right? It's hard sometimes to remember that other people are as real to themselves as you are to yourself. But Dell, anyway, I do think she would be capable of jump shots.
Yeah, well, I told her I was reading it, and at the 1930s, jump shots weren't a widespread. Basketball was a two-hand push jump set shot. But I think if anyone was ahead of the curve, it would have been Dell. Because the team is so, I mean, and again, although the stories aren't told by the different voices, the girls on this team each have this sort of mutual interdependence. I mean, one girl does something, she shouldn't have had to do to get access to the bus they drive. I mean, but she did it for the team. I mean, there's a kind of, there's that. There's also, and I said, when I was telling Karen beforehand about sort of what to me is a Midwestern quality, which is things aren't really pronounced. So Dell actually is quite smitten with another girl on the team. And there's, they're 15 and they probably don't know all the things there are to possibly do, but there's definitely a romance kindling. And it's that sort of, it's there.
It's really
without it being like, oh my God, it's this.
Yeah.
And it feels like the right thing to both of them as it goes along in its sort of awkward way. I don't want to go too far into this, but yeah.
I will say, I'm Melissa Febos as a friend, and I'm so excited for her new book. And I think in this book, it felt important to me. There's a lot of like truly horrific things that happen, and there is a strain, I think, of real sorrow that, I mean, I don't know, it was difficult for me to write some of that, but it also felt important for there to be like sweetness, and some silliness and some laughter. I was telling my friend Vince also that the jokes to dust ratio is heavily freighted to dust. And so, that going in. But people do get to have romances, and some of the surprising events happening between Black Sunday and the Republican River flooding. I mean, some of it is that people like fall in love, and the vertigo of that, I think exceeds in some ways, just what is flattening about despair.
So something that's there is a current through the book with the main characters is they're all in a place of loss. Adele, her mother has died or has been killed. Has not just died; she's been killed. The Prairie Witch, whose name does come out as in the course of the book, has lost the newborn child. I mean, and would say the son was alive, but was told he was not. Someone who doesn't, she's never with anyone in any of these familial ways exactly, but Cleo, the photographer, is carrying around her family in the sense that she's trying to get these photographs. She's taking photographs, and that's another part. We're talking about all these stories transmitted into to the Prairie Witches the vault. There's a roll of photographs, and the one, and for all the Polishness, there's one small Danish town that yields a camera that's used by this photographer whose camera has otherwise been stolen. And this camera does marvelous things, and I probably wouldn't be able to describe what it does as well as you should say because it gives people more than we would think a camera can.
Yeah.
But it's also part of knowing and seeing different elements of where you are.
Yeah, I loved in the land acknowledgement, that idea of, these are the people who care for this place in the past, the present, and the future. And I think, especially talking to people like Mimi, people like James, and thinking about the way that one thing Mimi said to me that really struck me, and this is she practices, different. She's trying to change global agriculture, but she's doing it by making her farm kind of a test case. And she said, wow, we really do need to stop thinking in lines that end, and just sort of restoring some sense of like how, and that we need longer imaginations, and to use these, like this incredible ability we do have to actually conceive of time, beyond our deaths, to think about what we owe other generations. And that, I mean, echoes of that happened, when I was doing this research in kind of incredibly different places. I talked to some people doing repatriation, rematriation work. So I think like thinking about how time might bend into a circle. Anyway, I really wanted this photographer to have or I didn't know, I guess. I didn't know is the honest answer in the first draft. And then I was excited by the idea of having these two countervailing forces. So you have these witch ladies who swallow the past. Now my children are like the only children in 2025 that know what an ear horn is, but through antlers and tin cups and, who kind of are conduits, and they take the past and they absorb and hold it there. And then I thought that it would be sort of wonderful. It just happened paragraph to paragraph, and I was excited by the idea that there'd be a camera that could make pictures kind of across the planes of time, so 400 years in the present and some hypothetical future, yesterday and tomorrow. And I have a photographer friend who was telling me some of his favorite photographs are a mistake, right? We have one in our, it inspired the story I mentioned, the tornado auction. And there was a group of black cattle at a sale barn, and they were running in a circle, and some mistake in the exposure kind of whirls them into a cyclone. I think I was thinking a little, and he was like, some of the best photos, some of the best work I do is a total surprise to me. So it was really kind of thrilling. I loved writing these scenes with Cleo in the root cellar. And during this period, Dorothea really didn't want to send some of her negatives. So she wanted to know what she'd made pictures of. So she would go to chicken coops or root cellars or, and kind of set up a makeshift darkroom. All of that felt sort of analogous to writing to me. And I've often felt that drafting too, that you don't always, the joy of it is when it's a real surprise.
Did you, so the book has photographs in it, and those are, in fact, I read an early edition of the pre-publication thing, and there are pictures in the final book that I hadn't seen before. So I was like, oh, wait, I had to look at the book again a little bit differently now. But there's one picture of an open door that goes down into one of these Midwestern root cellars or storm cellars.
Have you been inside one?
Oh God, yes. I was like, and you got the smell of, you go down there. I mean, sometimes they're built so you stay out of tornadoes' way and all, but it's also where all the canned peaches and watermelon pickles and all that stuff is kept, and it's cobwebby, but it's got a kind of a sweet, musty, dusty smell, and that's universal. I mean, I've been in several of them, and with the little door thing. Anyway, I saw the picture, and then I had one.
I love that. I love that picture. Yeah, I did get to go stand in one, and just speaking of like a place, I mean, you feel sort of like a seed in the earth.
Yeah.
I got a little claustrophobic,
Yeah.
But I love the idea of like these images that would become future history kind of being made like inside this earth itself. Although, I mean, I romanticize it. I think if I was like in a sweltering root cellar, like I might, take a Polaroid. I don't know.
Some of the ones can be, depending on where they are, they actually can be part of a larger cellar. And
Yeah.
you're,
There is a vault then,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
There is sort of
yeah.
this, I love that anyway, the subterranean part of it.
In my
the-
grandparents' house, I had the old washer with the ringer thing.
Oh,
on it.
wow. Can I ask what your least favorite chore was? I was asking a lot of people in Nebraska this when I went out there.
I can't, my favorite one was hanging laundry because it had the smell, they had long clotheslines. I can't remember
I love
too
that.
bad. Wasn't asked to do too many bad chores. Weeding, I guess.
I started a fight asking that question. People like, it was obviously milking, people all had
No,
different.
I wasn't on a farm. I wasn't.
Yeah.
We'll get to questions here in a minute. But one other thing to bring up is, as we've been touching on, there are real people and places in the book. The Cleo doing the photographs is sending him to a fellow who actually was doing this out of DC named Roy Stryker. And he actually did punch holes in the pictures he didn't like that were sent. And that's, again, in the book. But you touched on, in reading the section you read, the place where the Prairie Witch was birth, and it was a real place. Let me set this up a little bit. So the first time I talked about Karen's book to somebody out, having read it back last fall, was at a party, and a house party kind of thing, and a woman was there, and I'd never met her, and she wanted to break the ice and say, this woman's not here. She wanted to be, but because she could have told this story herself. She said, what are you reading? And I said, well, I just got done reading this amazing book that unfortunately you can't read for a few months because it's now here. But I said it was set in Dust Bowl, Nebraska in the 1930s. And she goes, oh, Nebraska, that's where I'm from. I said, so am I. And then she said, yeah, they're from Denmark. And I said, so are mine. And then we stopped for a minute. And we did not come on the same boat, nor the same town. They were in different towns. And then she actually said, oh, I've lived here 20 years and I haven't met anyone else from Nebraska like this. And I said, don't worry, we're here. It's not always the first thing that comes up in conversations. Just like we don't have a distinct accent like Oklahoma does, or even Minnesota does. And I said, the novel's not about the Danes in Nebraska per se. It's more Polish, and it's out in this fictional town, but there's some real things in it. And I said, for example, outside of Lincoln, there was the Milford Industrial Home for Unwed Mothers that existed from 1890 to 1954. Without missing a beat, the woman goes, my mother was born there. 4,000 babies were born there. Most of them probably did not get to stay with their mothers. And her mother must have been one of the last ones. Her mother is alive down in Eugene, and we're working on getting connections made, because I was just like, whoa.
So it blew my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, and it was an incredible email to receive, because, I did meet some people with living ties to this history, but nobody from Milford, right? No one living today with a connection to this home for unwed mothers that, is.
So this was because it was not really legal to be unwed and have a baby. It would be if you're a woman. The guys were obviously, and she told the story about what happened, how her grandmother ended up there. But it's really the description of, you were sentenced there for a year. If you had your baby 2 months in, you had to spend the next 10 months there. But not only is the Prairie Witch, young Antonina there, a woman who has been in U.S. history stories, a Lakota Sioux woman, known as the Lost, what was she, the Lost?
Lost Bird.
Yeah, Lost Bird, a woman named Zinkala Nooney, whose own life story was incredible and intense, but she also was really in this home. And you tell some of her story with care and respect, saying there's other versions of her story, and but
that was a little bit uncanny as well. I was talking to the historian Brock Anderson, because again, I was just calling people. I felt like I needed help, and I had set this story here. I had imagined that this woman became a witch, or that what she's renting out as storage space is this terrible loss. Like the loss of her child really kind of dynamates a space in her, and now she's kind of renting it out essentially to people. So I explained this conceit to Brock. And I was telling him that I was setting the story at the Home for Unwed Mothers in Milford during these years. Did he know anything about it? And he said, well, you'll have to write about Lost Bird then. and Braques Lakota. And he said, I had asked him, what haunts you when you think about this history? Is there any particularly? I was just curious. It was such a personal question. So this was not our, our first conversation. And he said, well, he's somebody who feels like the chance to know, language, culture, tradition. So much was taken from me before I was born and knew what I was missing. He's like, this was taken from me. And he said, Lost Bird is so meaningful to so many of us for this reason. She was the infant survivor of the Wounded Knee Massacre, and she's kidnapped by someone named General Leonard Colby. And it's a deeply tragic story. And when I found out that she was there exactly at this period, it was a real consideration because it was, I don't want to participate in this very long history of erasure, and then nor did I want to lay claim to a story that's certainly not my own. So, with some help and with conversations with others, I really did try to kind of bear witness to the things these women survived in this place, but also maybe to stop them from being kind of compressed into statistics or tragedies. And it was hard because there's not actually all that much. There's secondary sources, but I met no one. It's so interesting to have this living person. I met no one who could tell me anything about, I was really depending on secondhand sources. And I just, my assumption was that if you survived an institution like this, laughter would get you, that these were really idiosyncratic, unique, full people. At this time, it's like if you read, you all could go and Google and see some of the attitudes that are kind of built into these brick and mortar institutions. It's the progressive era, and the sort of evangelism is shading into social work. And in the early days, I think this practice changed a little, but they were designed to facilitate adoptions. They really coerced very poor women, and some of them very young, into giving their babies up, and they were often adopted out to white Christian homes. So I found myself thinking, there are some out and out awful, people in this story, and there's naked greed and speculation, but it was, in some ways, it was a different strain of horror to think about people who really want to be helpful, like some of the nurses in a place like this, for example, teachers at the federal Indian boarding schools. You can read these letters, and to me, what was chilling was, there are people where they're just monsters, right? But these were people who genuinely believe that they're doing the right thing and have no doubts, and you feel that in their correspondence. And to me, that is chilling in a very different way, right? And just sort of thinking about, well, how do some of these systems and attitudes warp a genuine impulse, right? And, equals make friends. So you see what happens when kind of some of these dehumanizing views, what that like sincere wish, I think it starts as a real sincere wish to do something good. And that history, is very old, and it's with us still, that kind of paternalism.
So my last thing as a follow-up before we do open up, knowing all the years you worked on this book, and now as it's published into what we are in the middle of, or beginning to be in the middle of now, with attempts to not only re-erase things, but actually rename and reclaim, we name it the Gulf of America, or do this thing to Canada. So do you feel the tension there? Here, it's like one of the wonderful things is watching the state of Nebraska be given its Nebraskan, I think is more like with a proper name. And just as here, what we call sometimes moved to Duwamish is, I think is actually called Duwabsh, is the pronunciation for where we are here. So have you thought about that at all, or is that?
About this sort of
publishing into this time, watching this continue, because it is, the narrative, they're trying to
citizenship, it's
trying to
all, yes,
wipe out this,
absolutely.
as there have been attempts to really re-look at Ned Blackhawk, or the 1619 Project, or all those attempts to people to really see the larger real history, and like these.
Absolutely. I grew up in Florida, and there was a way where it really wasn't until I was researching writing Swamplandia that I really thought about Lake Okeechobee, all the names you grew up with that are now disaggregated from history and culture, or you can if you're like a white kid like me in South Florida, without like living and speaking these names every day and not actually knowing what they mean, having the most shallow apprehension of what they mean. And I think, Harney's Peak right?
Yeah.
Is black elk, and who knows what will happen. It's very frightening. There's a section in this book called The Counterfeiters, this scabby orphan who's really kind of a survivor, and she has that canny ability to read people. And the witch is not so imaginative, you know, because she spent all of her life in like a dissociative trance. So she says, I will help you counterfeit memories for people. I'm really good at that. I know exactly what lie. I will tailor a lie for whoever comes in here. And you just tell them that's what they deposited. And so, and of course it doesn't go well, but I mean, when I wrote this section about the counterfeiters, it is really I could not have foreseen to watch these world historical events revised right in front of our eyes, to watch the real aggression inverted and distorted. It's good right now. I mean, I'm so grateful for journalists and for bookstores, for libraries. That was the other thing just to say about your bookstore and about, you know, Lauren Groff, I'll get to visit, and her response to censorship in Florida was to open a bookstore. It makes me very grateful. It does not surprise me that the Contest for the Future plays out in places like, you know, a home for unwed mothers, you know, the federal Indian boarding schools, but then they're analogs today, right? Like attacks on, you know, women's bodily autonomy, and attacks on, you know, on what you can learn and know on how history is taught. And it's frightening to watch that. And I'm grateful because there is a real immune response. I can see it that is, you know, mounting now.
A couple of people there to think about with all that too.
Yeah.
People have questions.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were
No,
saying
no,
my
that's
daughter
good.
was like running for the door. I'm like, Ada,
No,
wait.
Ada, we're talking about you. No,
These are my beautiful kids, Ada and Oscar. I really couldn't have imagined this book without them.
Yeah.
And not to pressure anyone, but they brought a special stamper, and they'll stamp anything you want. You don't even have to
Okay.
buy a book.
I didn't know that part.
That
That part of the book
You
signing.
could say you went
Yeah.
to the best nightclub. Like,
Do
Questions?
folks have questions? One here.
I'm just wondering, which authors have inspired you?
you know, for this particular book, so very many. Louise Erdrich, I got to speak with her in October. I think she is like just one of the greatest writers ever to live. Toni Morrison's Paradise for this book, because it is multi-voiced and it's set in a town, Ruby, Oklahoma, and sort of violent overlapping histories. I love The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. And I'm sure I wouldn't have conceived of These Prairie Witches without that novel. John Singer is a deaf-mute man, and he is sort of the repository of secrets for his town. But it's told there's a tomboy named Mick. There's a black abolitionist and doctor. It's a really wide cast. I love 100 Years of Solitude. I love Calvino's Cosmocomics, if you guys want to read something just joyful right now. And people writing today, I mentioned Kaveh Akbar's Martyr is like, I think, one of the finest novels. Tommy Orange's Wandering Stars is terrific. There's so many beautiful books out there. I feel like people ask me for my favorite book. I'm like, does anyone have like just one that they would say?
We have a question over there. Person in a red hat.
Oh, hi, Oscar.
Do you like being a writer?
What's that, baby?
Do you like being a writer?
Sometimes. I really love getting to be a writer. I'm really happy my kids are here. This book took me so long. I mean, most of their lifetime. So I think it was like Jack Torrance in The Shining, where they were like, they write so much. Yeah, Oscar was like, you've only written 6. I was like, I do really love being a writer, Oscar, but I love being your mom, and those are the two great. So I'm blessed to get to do both things.
Does Ada have a question now too, or?
Ada?
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
I really actually have to take this one. It's gonna be.
I know. I'm sorry.
Keep it even.
Is there any editors who weren't Tony who helped you with this book?
Thank God, Ada. I married your dad, who is a fantastic editor, a patient and kind. The best editor is your dad. And I also have Jordan Pavlin, who is a mutual friend and an extraordinary, like, champion and editor and gave me the most amazing global notes. I mean, this was a tricky symphony to conduct, and I couldn't have done it without your dad and Jordan.
He is for real, Tony Perez, I mean, at Tin House and other places, but he's, yeah, it's not just like in-house editor, he's a really.
Yeah, no, that's true. Thanks.
I mean, there are people that do that, but he really is the real, you know,
Yeah, he's edited Joy Williams
Yeah.
and Hanif
Yeah.
and many people.
Yeah.
We have one here.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks. I just finished reading a dystopian novel that I didn't know was dystopian when I started it. And I'm really angry because this author had written a wonderful novel before that wasn't dystopian. And what do you think about all the dystopian stuff out there? We're in a difficult enough time without every 2 minutes something coming up which tells us about how, you know, we're all, I don't know, crawling in the mud or whatever. we're doing.
Yeah, it's true. I have a really dear friend who doesn't read my stuff, and she's like, I lived some of these things and I'm good, you know? So I think that's really fair. She's a Terry Pratchett person, and I'm like, we all get to mix our own medicine in a bookstore. This is what's amazing about the bookstore. You can write your own RX. I sometimes love, Joy Williams wrote a book called Harrow that is a crushing book. I mean, it is a devastating, nightmarish, very bleak book, but I think there's hope inside it. You can feel like the seeds of another world inside it.
Oh, thanks. It did come, you know, there was a little hope at the end, but they're still crawling in the mud. You know, this is a book by Leif Enger, and his new book.
Okay.
And yeah, I am, well, just because it's different. I loved
Yeah.
an earlier book. And it was just interesting to me that there seems to be so much of it on television and everywhere. And you know, how are we going to break through if we're always, you know, fighting even worse people in the media and in books and in this? It's like, God. Can you imagine anything worse than what we're going through?
I have a friend who's a poet, Maureen McLean, who says that that's the challenge, right? That of sort of like resisting apocalyptic anxiety without denying reality. And it's really hard. I think it's it's a real, and I think it is. And then there's also, not to just throw page 8 quotes at you, but I love these both. Just to kind of, as a North Star, you know, Rebecca Solnit says, hope is a continuous negotiation with the future. So that's sort of, because you don't, right? It's really tempting for me too. Like, I would seek out a prayer, which sometimes, I mean, oblivion can feel close to, you know, there's something difficult about tuning into others' suffering. There's a lot, you know, happening in our country and world right now that is like genuinely devastating. I think with this book and this camera, I really found myself wanting at least to give glimpses of what might be possible if we applied ourselves in a different direction. Mimi asked that question. She says, this is what I think it would look like if we got it right now, whatever that, you know, and that will mean different things to different people. And I think even just practically, I so agree with you. I mean, politically too, I wish we had better storytellers offering people more, like a politics of more, instead of like, here's a threat and you're gonna lose even more unless you vote this way. I wish that we offered people robust visions of like a world they could believe in and like a story they could see themselves in, of just shared abundance. I mean, it sounds, all of this stuff like invites an eye roll, right? But I think many of us want that. And I see people doing that envisioning work and moving towards those visions. And I really agree. Like, I just think practically, if you cannot, if the dire, right, if the hell world seems more likely, if we're rehearsing for that scenario and doomsday prepping and that, and we won't get to, we have to try. I really do think so.
We've got a question over here.
Thanks for being here.
I'm sorry that I don't know where sound is coming from. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. I became aware that your new book was coming out with the cover story of book page, and I was looking at the pictures that they were representing. You know, with some of the punched out pictures that were, you know, some of them were funny and you know, some of them were peculiar, and some of them just made you mad to look at. You know, it's like, why would you punch out somebody's face? You know, it just seems so spiteful. I was curious how you came upon those pictures and how you decided to write about them.
Yeah. So these are the hole punch negatives, which any of you can see if you go to the Library of Congress website and just put hole punched in the search engine for the Farm Securities Administration photos. And I was familiar, I think many people are, with Migrant Mother, and you know, the Rothstein photographs of dust storms. but I didn't know about these hole punch. I think when I started writing about the Dust Bowl, I returned to that archive because it really did shape a lot of, I didn't live through that time. So a lot of what substitutes for our collective memory of that period. And I thought there was something, and others have written amazing essays about them now too, but Roy Stryker's decisions, they're not always, the rationale's not always clear. Sometimes it's a duplicate and you can tell he just chose the stronger image. And then sometimes, I think there's correspondence that suggests it's a political calculation because the Southern Democrats are in office and the funding for the New Deal is really at stake. So for me, it really was a way of thinking about how policy and memory really are kind of mediated in these ways. And I loved that book page piece. I was grateful for it. But it's true that some of the hole punches seem quite violent. You can punch anywhere, right? Why put it right through someone's face? Why put it through their crotch, right? So there's something also really discomforting about looking at them, just as to let you all know. And I thought that idea of that shadow archive was really interesting too. And it wasn't, there's no way to write a book about the West where you actually tell a complete full history of the West, who could? But I was thinking about what the whole sort of, what they kind of illuminate too, and what they suggest, that here's this archipelago of facts that you sculpt one understanding around, but there's an ocean there. I mean, I really thought that time and again, there were as many Dust Bowls as there were people who experienced this weather. And so it made me reflect on that a little bit too, like what forces shaped my own understanding of that time, and why hadn't, I speak just for myself, right? But I really did not connect colonial violence on the Great Plains and the dispossession, right, of Native nations and other families that lived here, since time immemorial with the Jodes and the Okies. Those two, I learned them in separate units in a social studies class, and I internalized them in little boxes that didn't connect. So I think part of the project of this was really trying to tell a wider story about what the causes of environmental collapse are then and now.
We're on your right, and we have a question.
I'm sorry, it's really weird, guys. I really keep looking at people who are like, my mouth's not moving. I beam to you. I'm not the one asking the question, but I see you.
Hi, thanks so much for your writing. I've loved it since St. Lucy's home. So
Oh, thank you.
it sounds like there are multiple voices in this story. And I'm wondering, in your drafting, did you write them kind of sequentially and find them sequentially, or did you find you were able to toggle between them as you were drafting?
I did write them sequentially, and they sort of came that way, and it just felt a little like musical or something. And I remember having that conversation with Jordan. She was like, how fixed does this order have to be? And I think it really did feel like a fixed, and sort of until the end when things start kind of tightening into a spiral. Cleo sort of arrives a little bit later, I think because she's coming from the East to sort of tell the story that she's been sent to find, and things, don't go quite the way that she anticipated. But I think the Prairie Witch came first, and I genuinely think that I had put this book aside. I had tried to write it a few times, and I went through some stage where I was like, I'm a story writer. I guess I'm not a novelist. And then I think in the way that children make everything more acute, I think that this childless mother and this motherless child made a lot more sense to me. I really felt like I could inhabit them in a new way. I felt like I could write from that perspective, and I wouldn't have been able to do it at 29 or whenever I first got this glimpse of this conceit. I couldn't have. So this I find to be both encouraging and discouraging for the writers out there. I mean, it was it's not, again, not a linear, the seed was dormant for a long time. Thank
I
you.
have another question on this
Yeah.
side. Oh,
Okay.
did you
and then
call in
we're
something?
right in here in the middle.
Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I've been a fan for a long time too. And the other night I couldn't sleep, and I read some St. Lucy's, and it was not a comforting story actually, but it made me feel comforted. So thank you very much
I'm
for your
so
writing.
glad.
Okay, so I know this book is set in Nebraska, not Kansas. Maybe I'm just crazy, but the stuff like the scarecrow coming to life, the rainbow on the cover, a witch, the fact that there's a place called Uz.
I know.
Am I totally crazy for thinking there might be a connection to that great American myth, The Wizard of Oz? Am I
You
making
know,
stuff up?
I think I just have to accept that there must be. I mean, I really, it's interesting because I resist a little, I mean, and just very frankly, like L. Frank Baum had terrible and racist and dehumanizing views about Native Americans and indigenous people. So it's like a comparison I resist for all kinds of reasons, given what this book, led me to sort of think through. However, I was a child in like in swampy Florida. And so for sure, my first contact with tornadoes, with Kansas, I mean, I remember exactly where I was watching that movie with my grandma. And I mentioned this to a friend, how much the Munchkin Corridor scared me. She's like, I taped this for you. And I was just, but I mean, it's really moving to see the black and white into Technicolor. Tony was telling me David Lynch was so deeply, that this so imprinted on him that there's some readings that all of his work are different retellings of Oz. I mean, I think it is sort of inescapable. Yeah, somebody was asking, I mean, I know Wicked is having such a big moment, and someone asked me if these witches had anything in common with those witches, and I was like, no, I don't, but I do, I'll to say like, you can't have a scarecrow point of view character without inviting that. I'm sure it did in the molds of my thinking. I'm sure that's an imprint, but the text I was more consciously in dialogue with was the Book of Job.
And the scarecrow in your book is a significant.
He's a significant character. I know. And that, it's interesting. I mean, that was from the very beginning. That arc was there.
Yeah. I think right in the,
Yeah, we have time for one more.
the red
we have
red
one more?
hat, she's had her hand up. Yeah.
I'm also an anxious introvert, so I'm gonna try to say this question clearly. Yeah, thank you for being here. And I want to acknowledge I normally wouldn't ask this question of a female author or a woman author, but your lovely children are here, and your book deals with themes of motherhood and children and caregiving. So I myself have 2 very young children as well. I try and write, but I think like the larger question I have is there's lots of different forms of caregiving in the world, whether it's you're helping your family or your neighbors or your children. And yet we're also trying to be creative people and carve out that time. So I would love to hear any advice you have for people that are trying to caregive while also being creative and finding time to be
Oh
a
my
writer
gosh.
or other ways of creativity.
Well,
Yeah.
especially thank you for being here tonight, because now I understand that it takes like a support staff of people, right? There's like an invisible, anytime parents come out, I want to pour them a margarita and just, I know we're on the clock, like, yeah, it is really challenging. I've thought about some of this book too, some of the sorrow in it for me was thinking about, I mean, how much I love my children, and also how the way that we've drawn lines around this world, you're really encouraged to alchemize money, to just take your life's time and turn it into money for your direct descendants. And that is part of how the Dust Bowl came to be, truly, right? I mean, that sort of precarity that is engineered, and that imperative to think about time as money. And writing is slow work. I felt, I don't know, these beautiful children like came on like a much more orderly clock than this book did, right? So I think that has helped me a little bit to just remember, I mean, it really is, things come at different speeds. And my friend Rivka Galchin wrote a beautiful book, Little Labors, when her daughter was small. And it also just feels like a reproduction of the brain of a mother. It's in these like elliptical bursts, and you could just, you're like, there's 4 a.m. feeding, it's, and so I took encouragement from that. I'm like, you might find new structures that are suited to, the part of this story that you're living. But it's so good. I think about this too, that speaking of libraries, I think there are a lot of trapped stories, because we really, I was telling Tony just today, like, I always feel sort of terrible if I complain about writing publicly or say, oh, I had a bad writing day, because so few people have like one spacious hour to make anything. And that does genuinely break my heart. People should have spacious time to dream in. They should have that ability to do creative things with their time here. And women, I sort of thought coming out of the pandemic, I really did believe this. I was like, now that we see what this economy runs on, and like this invisible unpaid labor that is essential for this show to go on, probably there'll be some massive reform. And I mean, you know, of course, that sounds very naive today, but it's the long game, also.
Thank
Wait.
you both so much.
Thank you guys for being here.
Yeah, you want to say something?
What I did, one last word, because uh, now I won't get to say this in Karen's presence, but 'cause the book, all these things we've been saying and Karen's saying and Karen writes, it really is one of that holds mystery and awe in it, and the things we were just talking about. And I thought these words are words Karen has near the end of the book, which I think also describe this in the bigger mystery. Why write a story about something beyond what words can name? And that's the end. That's near the end of the book. This question that she has written this book with all these incredible stories, and then she's still asking the question of the stories, which is part of what makes her work so remarkable. This book and the books leading up to it. So thanks, Karen.
Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you guys all.
Thank you. And
Don't forget to get a
now the book's now
beautiful
the book's
stamp on the way out.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to let you know, Karen's going to sign at that little white table. If you can line up toward the podium, that's great. And like she said, her kids will stamp you. Yeah.
Additionally.
Yes. Yes, with your consent. And our friends at Elliott Bay Book Company have copies of the book right over there. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to Elliott Bay Book Company. Thanks to the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, the Seattle Times, and the Seattle Public Library. And of course, thanks to all of you for coming out tonight.